Oh, please stop. Really, that's okay. Thank you. I'm just a local guy. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Westport Library. We're delighted to have all of you here from town, from out of town. And we have a very exciting evening in store for you, as we do every night when Speaking of Music is at the Westport Library. Tonight in particular is a special occasion because we're going to tackle a subject that is very rarely attempted in live performance because of the complexity of the music of Duke Ellington and all of the ancillary effects, influences, and legends that it has spawned. It's rarely performed live before audiences. So I am honored and privileged to be here tonight for Speaking of Music, which is, if you're not familiar with what we do, we combine a music topic in discussion and talk about a certain kind of American indigenous music with live performance following it. So that gives everyone an opportunity to hear a little bit about what the music is all about, where it came from, where it's going, what it's done, what it's been, whether it's jazz, whether it's folk, whether it's blues, whether it's soul, ragtime, or any other American indigenous music, because we are Americans and we are proud of our American heritage and our democratic society, aren't we? We're holding on. So I would like to welcome you on a part of the library and welcome you to the library, which, as you all know by now, is no ordinary library. And our hats are off. We're all lucky as hell to have a place like this in our community, for our community and neighboring communities to share and to have programming and experiencing the delightful activities and concerts and programs and opportunities that it provides. I quickly would like to make reference to the fact that we have added some helpers to push us along this year, and I would like to thank out loud the people from Leifer Properties, as well as the Hudson Malone people, Doug Quinn, and the Little Pub people, Doug Grabe, who is now entranced in Dunville's down in Saugatuck. And also to say thank you to Ann Sheffer and Bill Shuffler and Barbara and Joe Pierce, who are helping us out tonight with Gold's Delicatessen. Since 1958, the band is chowing down on every Gold's wannabe known to man right now. So I would tell you very quickly a little bit about what brings us here tonight on my end. I'm a Westport guy. Actually grew up in Weston, but my folks summered in Westport in the late 40s and bought in Weston in 51. So I went to Staples and grew up in Westport, and I always felt I was honored and privileged to have a Westport or Weston upbringing. As I'm sure many of you know, we live in a special part of the world here. And it has spawned a special library with a special opportunity to do things like we're doing here. Just quickly, my history is one of, my family has been in the music business for 115 years. My grandfather was a ragtime composer in the teens and 20s, and he was underscored in about 200 films. He was unknown, undiscovered, and underappreciated, but he is being played around by a whole new army of ragtime piano players and ragtime performers. So it goes way back. My mother lived in the city. She was a jazz freak and worked for Condé Nast when women weren't working in the men's workforce, next to Cecil Beaton at the next desk, and was friendly with John Hammond and Barney Josephson. So she ended up at Cafe Society downtown the night that Billie Holiday was first playing in a white jazz club in New York, because she had, with John, bought Billie Holiday her first dress. So I grew up on African-American music and began listening to stacks of records. Before Sally had the record department at Klein's, my mother had stacks of records playing at home from Mahalia Jackson, Paul Robeson, Ray Charles, Meade Lux Lewis, Pete Turner, and Teddy Wilson since I was 8, 10, 12, 14 years old. And I graduated quickly to doo-wop and rock and roll and then soul music. And I have been an ardent listener and proponent of good American rhythm and blues and jazz for my entire life. After COVID, I began to realize that people were having difficulty because of the political situation in America of talking to each other, and they needed a place to go to talk about subjects and things and discuss. So I decided we would have a moderated speaker panel or two, and I experimented with this idea of having people talk about music and then hear music, and it was incubated in the last 5 years, but really made possible, and thank you very much to the Westport Library for this phenomenal facility with state-of-the-art sound and light and ambiance and people that have made, you know, higher-end musical programming possible, and why we are here tonight for Speaking of Music. End of speech. So Westport is a special place, and I want to quickly thank the library folks here for their help, specifically Alex Giannini, who is not here tonight, but he's here in spirit. Bill Harmer, also the same. Travis, EJ, Robin, Jennifer, David, and Bill for all your hard work and interesting things they do here to help promote and give people a fun night here at the library. But it is my high honor tonight to bring to you a speaker and share his wisdom with you, because he is someone that I only recently found in my life through the musical connection, actually, of the ragtime period. I, about 10 years ago, did a series of evenings for the Blue Parrot when Adam Lebarsky started working in Saugatuck. And I was searching the internet for New Orleans music, and I came up with a group of performers who were playing my grandfather's music as well as New Orleans music. And I contacted one of them, who told me he was interning at the Smithsonian. He was a ragtime buff, and that his boss was also a ragtime buff. And so it was through that connection that I had recently produced the Blues Brothers, ex-Blues Brothers band in Chicago, and I had a relationship with Steve Cropper and Lou Marini, some of the guys in the Blues Brothers, and it turned out that the curator from the museum had an affinity for the dishwasher in the Blues Brothers movie, Lou Marini. And I was asked if I would like to meet this gentleman. So I went to a Northern Virginia Ragtime Society performance that this young band leader had, and I was introduced to the curator, his boss from the Smithsonian, who is our speaker tonight. And that is how that happened, through my grandfather's relationship. And he asked me, yes, you can clap, he's here. And you'll be interested to know, because I did not know this, and it is an important piece of the puzzle here, is that the curator explained to me that our business is American history and the preservation of American history. Our collections and our exhibitions are only possible through the donations of artists who represent some significant piece of American history. And he said further, I believe that the interracial working together of black and white musicians in Memphis in the early 60s at Stax Records was a significant period, and I'm interested in that period. Do you know any of these people? And I said, yes, I do. And he said, would you be interested in working with us at the Smithsonian? We would like to talk to them. I said, well, let me think about this. I'll get back to you in about 8 seconds. So without any further ado, I will give you the information and introduce you to Professor John Hasse, who is here tonight. I would like to read a little bit about John for you, and then I'm going to pass the mic to him completely and be out of your hair for at least 30 minutes. During a 33-year tenure at the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History, Curator Emeritus John Edward Hasse developed exhibitions on Duke Ellington, Ella Fitzgerald, Frank Sinatra, and Ray Charles, among others. He founded the Smithsonian Jazz Masterworks founded Orchestra, and now celebrating its 32nd anniversary, and International Jazz Appreciation Month, which is celebrated in all 50 states and 40 other countries. His books include an acclaimed biography known as Beyond Category, The Life and Genius of Duke Ellington, with a foreword by Wynton Marsalis, and Jazz, the First Century, with forewords by Quincy Jones and Tony Bennett. As an expert on 20th century music, Hasse is a contributor to the Washington Post and 8 encyclopedias and has written 50 articles on music for the Wall Street Journal. His media appearances include CNN, CBS, PBS, BBC, NPR, and several documentary movies. He is the recipient of 2 Grammy Award nominations and 2 ASCAP Awards for excellence in writing on music. Hasse earned a BA cum laude from Carleton College, MA, and PhD degrees from Indiana, a certificate in business administration from the Wharton School, and 2 honorary doctorates. Active in cultural diplomacy for the U.S. State Department for many years, Hasse has continued to lecture on leadership, the arts, and music in over 25 countries. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise up and give a warm welcome to Professor John Hasse.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. And I think we ought to give a round of applause for the months and months of hard work and the brilliance behind the idea of this Talking About Music to Roger Kaufman. I'm going to tell you a story tonight. The story has a beginning, a middle, and not really an end as yet. It's the story of the man I consider America's greatest all-around musician, Duke Ellington. He was a composer, orchestrator, arranger, bandleader, conductor, piano soloist, accompanist, and musical thinker. And I can't think of any other musician who did all of those things so brilliantly.
Billy Strayhorn, my writing and arranging companion. He wrote our theme, Take the A Train. And now we'd like to do a very special operatic version of Take the A Train.
A 125 years ago, and just a few blocks from a place we see almost every night on the television news, the White House, a baby came into this world. He became known as Duke Ellington. The boy was destined to become a world-famous artist and celebrity, but he was raised in a segregated Washington, D.C., and a segregated America that treated him as inferior. This man, despite very little formal musical training, would go on to create hundreds of musical masterworks, such as the recording, the video you just saw, Take the A Train. He would receive the highest honors of Ethiopia, France, and the United States. His story is, in some ways, a magical fairy tale. In other ways, it's a story of constant struggle to get over one mountaintop after another. This is a story of a man who would overcome racial, social, and musical obstacles to become an artist of the first rank. He would be esteemed wherever people listened to his music. He would create and occupy his own magnificent place among American cultural heroes, a place beyond any existing category. Imagine for a moment that there was a band composed of 18 virtuoso players. Imagine that the conflicting egos and disparate styles of these stars were held in check by a brilliant leader. Imagine that this leader managed to keep his band together for 50 years. Imagine that he wrote nearly all the music for this band, over 1,700 compositions in all. Imagine that with originality and freshness, his works highlighted the best of his players and constantly broke new artistic ground. Imagine that he led the band through 10,000 recordings, 20,000 performances, and 10 million miles of travels. All of this did happen in the stylized life of Duke Ellington, and the charmed life as well. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to the beginning. The year was 1899, the place a middle-class neighborhood of the nation's capital. There, a boy was born to James Edward Ellington and Daisy Kennedy Ellington. He was a second child. The first died in infancy. "I was pampered and pampered," he said later, "and spoiled rotten by all the women in the family." Finally, he said, when he was 8, his parents let his feet touch the ground. His mother used to tell him, "Edward, you are blessed. You are blessed." And he grew up believing her. It became his private musical belief. And maybe his mother was right, because he gave so much to all of us who care about music. Washington, D.C. was at the time the undisputed capital of Black America. During his youth, the city boasted the largest Black population of any city in the country. Life for Black Americans was generally getting tougher. White racism, discrimination, segregation, and many other injustices. But Ellington's parents shielded him from most problems. And while there was a notable middle class in Washington, D.C., a Black middle class, they faced problems aplenty. In the 19-teens, President Woodrow Wilson, a Southerner, segregated the federal workforce. He had this to say: "Segregation is not humiliating, but a benefit. and ought to be so regarded by you gentlemen. Young Ellington's polite manners, fashionable clothes, and aristocratic bearing led a friend to nickname him Duke. From his father, young Duke was learning how to get ahead by charming people. He'd say to a beautiful woman, for example, "I'm so jealous of your smock." "Well, why is that?" she'd ask. "Because," he'd sigh, "it's closer to you than I'll ever be." Or, "Gee, you make that dress look pretty." Young Duke showed more early aptitude for art and more interest in baseball than in music. But by age 14, he had discovered ragtime piano and began playing for friends and then for dances. He found that there was always a pretty girl at the end of the piano keyboard, and after that discovery, he said, "I ain't been no athlete since." Ragtime and the new jazz music drew Ellington powerfully, and he began composing a little bit. His reputation as a band leader, or as a pianist, then band leader, grew. He named his band the Duke's Serenaders and became a professional musician playing in both the black community and the white. He married his neighborhood sweetheart, Edna. You see, in the early years, jazz was spelled sometimes J-A-S-S. He married his neighborhood sweetheart, Edna, but the marriage was destined not to last. By 1920, New York City had overtaken Washington in the size of its black population. New York was a powerful magnet, drawing the young and ambitious from all over. Secure and successful in Washington in 1923, the ambitious Ellington nonetheless made the fateful decision to move north to the bigger arena of New York City, north to Harlem, where the nightlife was rich and effervescent, and where the Harlem Renaissance was in full swing as the intellectual and artistic center of Black America. Harlem, teeming with life, hopes, dreams, and anger. Harlem in the age of jazz, which, better than any other music, expressed the spirit, pride, and pain of the Black experience in America. After a rocky start in New York, Ellington soon began opening door after door for himself and his band, which he proudly called the Washingtonians. He hired a trumpeter named Bubber Miley, a master of mutes and unusual growling sounds. Miley's playing transformed the group from a polite society band into a bona fide jazz band. Each time that Ellington would add a member to his orchestra, it would give him more variety and tone colors with which to compose and arrange. I'd like you to listen to just a little bit of Bubber Miley's famous solo, both bluesy and beautiful, on Black and Tan Fantasy from 1927. Nobody led a band like Duke Ellington. In 1927, Ellington landed a job for himself and his band as the house band at Harlem's most prominent night spot, the Cotton Club. The Cotton Club reflected white stereotypes of Black people with exotic and African-themed dances. The performers were Black, the audience was white, and the owners were mafia. True. Ellington leveraged his 3+ years there to greatly advance his capacity as a composer and a band leader. He continued to seek out musicians with unusual, distinct instrumental voices. He composed a variety of music to accompany the acts, and he honed his sense of pacing and showmanship. He began to make up his own rules as a composer, to evolve his orchestra's unique sound and to push against various kinds of limits. Upon joining Ellington, clarinetist Barney Bigard first thought Ellington composed with weird chords. In fact, Ellington was rewriting the rules of harmony, developing his own idiom. The African-American composer Will Marion Cook had urged Ellington, first you find the logical way, and when you find it, avoid it. Let your inner self break through and guide you. Never try to be anybody but yourself. Ellington took those words to heart. A prime example of finding his own way was Mood Indigo of 1930. Ellington turned the usual roles of trumpet, trombone, and clarinet upside down, and the resulting tonal colors had probably never been heard before in all of musical history. Nobody made music like Duke Ellington. By this time, the early 1930s, Ellington was breaking through racial barriers to perform in theaters and hotels previously barred to black people. He would continue to break through barriers and categories the rest of his life. He was now broadcasting frequently on radio and making his first appearances in motion pictures, such as this scene from 1930. Watch the expressive use of mutes. His men make their instruments talk. Leaving the Cotton Club in 1931, he now embarked upon an endless series of tours, though in most cities, he and his men could not get a decent hotel room, simply because of the shade of their skin. Yet everywhere Ellington went, he projected style and dignity. He had become a cultural hero to the young novelist Ralph Ellison and to the photographer Gordon Parks, who later recalled, quote, "Ellington had always been my hero. Unlike black Hollywood stereotypes, he never grinned, he smiled. He never shuffled, he strode. It was always, 'Good evening, ladies and gentlemen,' never, 'How y'all doing?' At his performances, we young blacks sat high in our seats, wanting the whites to see us, to know that this handsome, elegant, sharply dressed man playing that beautiful, sophisticated music was one of us. Ellington kept enlarging his band. By 1932, it had 14 instrumentalists and a singer, Miss Ivy Anderson. The 1930s saw him make two tours of Europe, both of them triumphs. He began writing songs that became hits, like Sophisticated Lady. That, by the way, was the creamy trombone of Lawrence Brown. It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing represents an example of Ellington as musical prophet. He wrote it in 1931, recorded it in 1932, and then 3 years later, the word swing seemed to be on everyone's lips as the swing era was launched. Well, let's listen to a little bit of it.
Don't mean a thing if you ain't got that swing. It don't mean a thing, all you gotta do is swing. Makes no difference if it's sweet or hot. Just give that rhythm every little thing you got. It don't mean a thing if you ain't got that swing.
When swing music and dancing became a national obsession in the late 1930s, Ellington stood above the pack, continuing to go his own musical way. He wasn't interested primarily in establishing a good beat for dancing, as you could say many of the swing bands were. Rather, he wanted to explore his musical imagination. Most of Ellington's music is highly personal. It's based on a memory, a mood, or an image. For example, one of my favorite Ellington pieces, Caravan, paints an intriguing and exotic picture of some distant place. By the way, it kills me to have to cut all these off midstream, but we've got a lot of ground to cover, and not much time. Ellington's band boasted some of the leading players on their instrument in any style of music anywhere in the world. Some of them collaborated with him on compositions, notably his longtime collaborator, Billy Strayhorn, who wrote the theme song, Take the A Train. Ellington wrote many pieces to highlight the gifts of these players, personalizing his compositions in a way that few composers ever have. For example, there was the brilliant trumpeter, Cootie Williams, the earthy, tricky Sam Nanton, the sublime Lawrence Brown, the clever Rex Stewart, the playful Ray Nance, the romantic Ben Webster, and the rhapsodic Johnny Hodges, my favorite of all his players. You'll hear why listening to Johnny Hodges bend, slide, and slur his notes and play even microtones. Oh, sorry.
We have the good fortune, of course, of having the same musicians to work with over a period of many years, and so we have wound up with a system of very highly personalized writing. So practically every note that's written is written for some specific instrumentalist in mind to take the solo responsibilities.
You've probably often heard it said that the band was his instrument. Well, he could play the band for the way he wanted to get the sound, you know. And he knew how the sound he had in his mind when he wrote it, and he picked certain musicians to carry out what he had in his mind.
Personalized arranging is a matter of arranging with all of the better characteristics of the performer in mind, and with deep consideration for the limitations of each one.
Ellington and his players, in my view, rank as some of the greatest musical individualists of the 20th century. But Ellington went beyond individualism. He created his own music, his own style. He created his own category. There was nobody like Duke Ellington. He was so individual, unique, that his longtime drummer, Louis Bellson, who was a good Catholic, I must say, used to tell this story. One day the Pope dies and goes up to heaven. He's met at the pearly gates by St. Peter, who says, "Holy Father, welcome. We've chosen your abode. You go 3 streets to the right. You take the first left, and it's the 4th home on the right-hand side." "Thank you," says the Pope. "But that great big mansion on the hill with the palm trees and the fancy cars, who lives there?" "Oh, that," says St. Peter, "that's where we put Duke Ellington." "Duke Ellington," says the Pope, but I'm the Pope." "That's right," says St. Peter, "but we've got lots of popes. There's only one Duke Ellington." During the 1940s, many Americans went to ballrooms with mirrored balls and danced to the big bands. Ellington's bread and butter was playing playing dances like that, as well as some stage shows. He rarely was invited to give concerts. Then in 1943, he played his debut at Carnegie Hall and established himself as a serious concert artist. After World War II, during World War II, Ellington wrote a civil rights musical. It was in 1941. He called it Jump for Joy. And this is an indication of what I believe was his big purpose in life: to command, not demand, not ask, not beg, to command racial respect for his music, his band, and his culture. After World War II, the big bands were all in trouble, and Ellington's orchestra went into commercial and creative decline. One popular music magazine, Downbeat, which had long been a champion of his, even urged him to disband. As if that weren't a low enough blow, in 1951, Ellington faced the gravest crisis of his career when his leading player, Johnny Hodges, left, along with 2 other top players, to form their own combo. Among them, they had 70 years with Ellington. Hodges had a unique sound, as I mentioned earlier, microtones and swoops and slides. Someone once asked Tony Bennett, "Who's the greatest singer?" He said, "Well, Johnny Hodges, of course." You'll hear a little bit of him on "I Got It Bad, and That Ain't Good." Johnny Hodges had a nearly inexhaustible fund of splendid melodic ideas. I never have heard him play a bad solo, and many of his solos give listeners like me goosebumps. Wow. For 5 long years, Ellington bided his time until he could make a comeback. Then after regaining Hodges, Ellington rebounded to national attention. The band gave a sensational performance at the 1956 Newport Jazz Festival, and Time magazine plasters his picture on its cover. His wit and irony showing, Ellington would say later, "I was born at the Newport Jazz Festival." Ellington's creativity was once again in high gear. He continued to write pieces for dancers, such as Satin Doll, and for the concert stage and recording studio, he wrote imaginative suites, including one on the themes of Shakespeare. Ellington also wrote Broadway musicals and brilliant scores for ballets and for motion pictures. But it was not until 1959, 30-some years after Hollywood invented movie soundtracks, that Ellington was invited to score his first motion picture for a feature film. He responded with a brilliant score for Anatomy of a Murder, starring Jimmy Stewart. This is very different than Ellington's early music, but this next example shows you how broad his brush was. As rock and roll began crowding jazz, Ellington turned abroad for bookings. He and his orchestra traveled to give performances in 65 countries. He sometimes toured for the U.S. State Department as an unofficial ambassador of goodwill and great music. In some countries, Ellington absorbed musical impressions that found their way into his works. For example, the Far East Suite, which really should be called the Near, Middle, and Far East Suite. Here's the movement named for a mountain in Lebanon. It's called Mount Harissa. Ellington kept on evolving partly by remaining open to new sounds, influences, and ideas. In this respect, he was like Pablo Picasso or Miles Davis, Frank Lloyd Wright, for that matter. As a result of his artistic growth, Ellington's work of the 1970s sounded very different from that of 50 years earlier, yet it was all identifiably Ellingtonian. Now in his 60s, the honors were rolling in, including Grammy Awards galore and 17 honorary doctorates, postage stamps in Africa, and France's highest award, the Legion of Honor. But one honor eluded him when the Pulitzer Prize Committee rejected him for a special citation. He pretended to be okay with it. He said, "Fate is being kind to me. It doesn't want me to be famous too young." He was 60 at the time, 66 actually. Behind the public facade, however, he was deeply hurt and angered. "What we do, what other black musicians do," he said, "has always been like the kind of man you wouldn't want your daughter to associate with." In 1969, however, President Richard Nixon awarded Ellington the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian award, at a special ceremony at the White House.
In the royalty of American music, No man swings more or stands higher than the Duke.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And the word freedom is one, coincidentally, that we are using at the moment in our sacred concert.
This is the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Of the thousands of items, hundreds of thousands of items, I'll get to this, in the Duke Ellington archives at the Smithsonian, this is my #1 favorite because it probably signified the peak night of Ellington's career. His father had occasionally been a butler for special events at the White House. Of course, he had to enter through the service entrance. Duke Ellington, his son, proudly walked through the front door. The 10-block journey from his birthplace to the White House took Ellington 70 years and 10 million miles of travels. Nobody led a life like Duke Ellington. He just mentioned his concerts of sacred music, and in 1965, he helped christen Grace Episcopal Cathedral in San Francisco with a commissioned work called A Concert of Sacred Music. And we're going to hear a little bit of Esther Marrow singing the Deathless theme, Come Sunday. Johnny Hodges died in 1970, but Ellington continued to soldier on, to compose and create. He was driven to tackle new problems, to create new sounds right up until his death. A lifelong smoker, he contracted lung cancer and died in May 1974, just weeks after his 75th birthday. His funeral, held at New York City's Cathedral of St. John the Divine, was packed with 12,000 associates, friends, and fans. Count Basie wept openly. Ellington's inspiration and leadership were sorely missed, and within months, 3 of his longtime players died. It was hard to believe that he was gone. His suave way, sardonic banter, wily, restless creativity, enormous energy and productivity, his dignity and example, vision and music making, all were ended. But with each passing year, Ellington's star has risen, and now he is enjoying the greatest comeback of them all. Institutions such as the Smithsonian are leading the way. Back in 1988, the Smithsonian acquired Duke Ellington's archives with 100,000 pages of unpublished music that he and some others in his band composed. Can you imagine getting 100,000 pages of unpublished music by Bach or Gershwin? That was a thrill that I felt that day in April 1988 when an effort that had been going on for 3 years that I was leading succeeded, and we acquired this treasure. It's a national treasure. We've cataloged the entire collection, and you can go online and find out exactly what's there. And this set of band parts for Mood Indigo shows you what I was talking about earlier, how he personalized his music. He doesn't list first trumpet, second trumpet, third trumpet. No, he lists the name of the player because he wrote for those specific players. And he had the luxury of many of them staying with him for year after year after year after year. So Ray, that's Ray Nance, trumpet. Upper right, Butter, that's Quentin Jackson, trombone. Bottom left, Jimmy Hamilton, clarinet. And then the last one is Rab, short for Rabbit or Johnny Hodges. We developed this large-scale, 5,000 square foot exhibition on Duke Ellington that traveled all over the country. And to keep his music alive, to make the archive sing, we established an 18-member jazz orchestra. Here conducted by David Baker with guest artist James Moody, and here conducted by Charlie Young of Howard University. This also inspired the creation of special month during April, which is his birth month, Ella Fitzgerald's birth month, Jazz Appreciation Month, every April, as Roger mentioned earlier. And every year, the museum issues a poster. Here's Ellington, Louis Armstrong, Billie Holiday, and this year's poster, Duke Ellington. This is his 125th year anniversary. For generations of Americans and legions of listeners around the world, Duke Ellington's music continues to resonate with cultural and personal appeal. As this next piece demonstrates, we'll get to that in a moment, his music is very much alive. His legacy is alive. Look at all these accomplishments of his. And today, you can hear high school bands playing his music. You can hear symphony orchestras doing his music. You can see ballet companies do his music, and he wrote for ballets. You can find professional musicians doing his music. All sorts of musicians cutting across many genres play his music. And at this time of year, it's appropriate to listen to a little bit of Ellington and Strayhorn's wonderful rearrangement, reimagining really, of the Nutcracker Suite.
It certainly sounds like it's going to be a good parlay, but I know this, that if Tchaikovsky were around and had a band, he'd be playing Ellington probably.
Oh.
But what we want to hear now is Ellington playing Tchaikovsky.
That's our cue, man. Go on.
That was recorded more than 60 years ago. Still sounds fresh, doesn't it? In a century, the 20th, that was rife with so much that was predictable, impersonal, and dispiriting, Duke Ellington, as eloquently as anyone, affirmed the personal, the human, the heartfelt, the hopeful, and the unique. Perhaps that is why his singular music and exceptional life continue to move and inspire so many people. In later years, Ellington used the phrase beyond category as a term of the highest possible praise for someone unique in their brilliance, such as Ella Fitzgerald. Because of the unmatched sound of his orchestra, the extraordinary range of his music, the dedication of leading a band for over 50 years, and the astonishing artistic heights to which his music soared, perhaps no one deserves his phrase beyond category more than he himself. And its other literal meaning, the phrase richly applies to Ellington. Nobody led a life like Duke Ellington. Nobody led a band like Duke Ellington. And nobody made music like Duke Ellington. He was truly one of a kind, beyond category.